Okay, it's time for a real quick video update on my Southern New England Railway. If you look back at the last video update I did, which was longer ago than I want to admit, you'll see that I've gotten some things done since then. In the last update, I mentioned a farm implement dealer that I was scratch building for my town of Ennisburg Falls. As you can see, that building is pretty much finished at this point. I do have to go into the concrete foundation walls here and maybe add a little bit of additional texture and color to it, a little weathering, and then blend in the base of the building in a couple of spots a little better to the ground there. But other than that, the building is fundamentally finished. It's completely scratch built. It's 100% styrene. Even the roof is styrene, evergreen styrene rib roofing that I used for that, standing seam roofing. Also, I'm going to swing the camera around here a little bit. Apologize, I don't want to make anybody seasick. You can see down here, this structure right here is a stand-in for the Ennisburg Falls Freight House. What I'm using here is actually a Walther's kit, just painted in the appropriate Central Vermont colors for my era. I did add some concrete texturing to the foundation walls and the base, and gave it a little base coat of weathering when I painted it, but other than that, it's straight out of the box Walther's kit. And then just to the right of that, we have another Walther's kit that's serving as a stand-in, maybe a little bit less of a stand-in, because if all goes according to plan, you are seeing a quick grab of a photo of this prototype building. This is actually two of the Walther's line side sheds combined, or actually really 1.5 of them. You can kind of see the gap there between the buildings under that Worthmore feed signs. And yes, the prototype building did have that Worthmore feed sign on top of the roof, right at the peak of the roof, which I thought was kind of interesting. Okay, we've moved over through the magic of video flyover, and we are now over in the Sheldon Junction area of the layout. As you can see here, I've got some buildings positioned. These are buildings that are left over from previous layouts again, and I'm just using them as more permanent stand-ins, such as this is actually a model of the Richford, Vermont station, which is a standard CV prototype, or closest the CV had to a standard depot design was this style of station. This was actually scratch built for me by a good friend, a guy named Rich Cobb. I still need to do some final weathering on the roof. This here is, you might recognize it as the Campbell Scale Models water tank. I built this when I was in high school, and I still have it and still have found use for it on this layout, as I've used it on virtually every other layout I've had. Probably need to go in and do a little bit of repair to it. I noticed here earlier today that the spout is down at the base here, has some issues I gotta fix. And then over here in the distance, you see the creamery building. This is actually a branch line laser kit, and this is a NYO&W, a New York, Ontario, and Western creamery building, or prototype from the NYO&W. But it's a nice typical building. I painted it in sort of standard, or as close to standard as I could find. Creamery colors, white with green trim, is pretty basic. If you look at the tree on the right hand side there, that's actually one of my crepe myrtle trees, and at some point I might do a video on how to build these up. But you'll notice here that I have a little blue laundry clip, or a small clip here, and I use this when I'm trying to position where the trees should go before I have to drill a bunch of holes and position trees in place. And this is just, like I said, a crepe myrtle branch that has had super tree material glued to it, and to make a nice foreground tree. This one is fairly tall, or it looks very tall, but honestly it's only about 80 feet tall, or about 75, 80 feet, scale feet tall, which is not super tall for a prototype maple tree. Just makes us realize how small a lot of our model trees really are. And here's a close-up view of the creamery building and its own independent base. You can see where I'm starting to blend the base into the rest of the layout scenery. And this area here, the access road for the creamery, where the farmers would drive up in their trucks or wagons in the old days and deliver their filled milk cans of raw milk to the creamery, is here. The dirt texture for the road here is actually sanded tile grout, weathered and toned a little bit and blended with some pastel. The next step here will be to put darker paint and textures on the hillsides, and most of this hillside is going to be covered with trees. So as you can see here, I've got a fair amount of backdrop painted around there, around the corner, almost as far as the river crossing where Thresher's Mill is. And so you can just see Thresher's Mill in the background here, and I can remove this tree if you don't want to see it and One of the neat things about putting the trees on these little clips is that you can move them around and create view blocks and see how the layout will look from different areas or different perspectives. And if you put a foreground element like this here, you notice how the creamery seems to be going further back. Anyway, I'm going to cut away here and we'll go ahead and take a little bit of look on some thoughts on painting the backdrop. I don't have much of a modeling tip this month, but I will offer something as of a thought, especially if you're planning to do your own painted backdrops. I do the far background hills, and those are done by blending some of the basic sky color with slightly darker, almost purple or violet color, or a ultramarine blue is what I used here. The darker the hills are, the closer they're going to look. So anything on a backdrop, the closer it is to you, it should be darker. So in this case, you can see one hill is to the left there is a little lighter than the one just to the right. And then that darker blue strip on top, and it kind of creates a little bit of a look of a shadow. But you don't have tree textures and stuff on far background hills like that. Where you start to get into the tree textures is in the closer trees. This is very much the first coat. It's not meant to be the finished backdrop. This is burnt umber, raw umber, and burnt sienna mixed together with some of the earth latex color, the actual base color of the scenery here. And it's just dabbed on. You just dab the brush on. And I use a very ugly and otherwise useless round tip brush that's been splayed out pretty thoroughly over the years. And you can see it creates this splotchy, kind of crazy, all over effect of brown. Because once that's dry thoroughly, you go back in with a slightly brighter color. Your brighter colors, and if you're doing summer, you would just use a series of, you basically just put blue and yellow on your palette and mix it together as you go into a series of greens. If you're doing fall colors like I am, then you need to be a little bit more diligent or a little more, have a little more color variety to use. But you can see there what you do is you add very lightly, you just kind of dab on the lighter colors and it creates a highlight. And so your shadows are created by that brown morass we saw before, and then your final colors are created with this highlight. The important thing to remember is you're not doing this this is not a painting that somebody's going to be studying up close. The backdrop you're looking at right here is about 32 inches from the aisle. There's going to be trees, there's going to be buildings and other textures and materials to look at. So the idea is that somebody's just going to see this in the background of what they're looking at. They're not going to be staring right at the painting. The other tip I'd give you on painting backdrops is to keep them fairly low. When you start getting into trouble is when you start having a horizon line that where it's 2 or 3 feet above the back of the base of the layout, and then you've got to try to paint a vertical surface to blend perfectly into a horizontal surface, and that is very, very difficult. This is probably the highest point I want to have the painted backdrop on the layout, and it's about 12 inches above the track. When I posted the last update, I said to myself that I didn't want to do another update until I had the track done, all the track that was in place and planned wired, and then the fascia painted, and maybe got to start at some of the scenery. So I've accomplished all that. It's taken me a little longer than I planned to, but as you can see, the track is all in. It does all work. It's all wired and functions, and there's feeder wires to every piece of rail, etc. So it does work well. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to do these updates perhaps a little bit more frequently moving forward. No promises, no guarantees. I only share things when I think I have something worthwhile to share. But in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks for watching.